Most people think beating an anti-aircraft gun comes down to missiles. Fly high enough, fly fast enough, and you outrun the cannons. That was the thinking in 1973. It was wrong. The ZSU-23-4 Shilka is a 19-ton tracked vehicle, roughly the size and weight of a large delivery truck. It carries 4 cannons that each fire up to 1,000 rounds per minute. That is 4,000 rounds per second hitting the air in front of you. Not missiles, not lasers. 4 water-cooled autocannons, radar-guided and capable of putting rounds on target in 25 seconds from cold. This weapon did not just shoot down aircraft, it changed how entire air forces flew. And 60 years after it first rolled out of a Soviet factory, it is still on active battlefields, still killing things its designers never planned for. The question is how a gun this old stays this dangerous and why nothing has fully replaced it. By the late 1950s, the Soviet Union had a gap in its air defense. Long-range surface-to-air missiles like the SA-2 could reach high-altitude bombers, but they had a dead zone. Anything coming in low and fast, below about 300 meters, slipped right past them. Attack helicopters, ground-skimming jets, close air support runs. The missiles could not track them at that altitude. The existing fix, the ZSU-27-2, was built on an open turret with 2 57mm cannons. Big rounds, decent punch. But it carried only 300 rounds total, had no radar, could not fire while moving, and could only be aimed optically. At night or in rain or dust, it was blind. Against a fast-moving jet, a crew had seconds to acquire, lead, and fire. The ZSU-27-2 could not do it reliably. NATO knew this gap existed. Soviet planners knew it too. The low-altitude corridor was where the next war would be decided, and the Soviets needed something that could fill it completely, day or night, moving or stationary. In April 1957, the Soviet Council of Ministers signed a decree ordering 2 new radar-guided anti-aircraft vehicles into development simultaneously. One was called Shilka. The other was called Yenisei, both named after rivers. The Yenisei carried twin 37mm cannons, heavier rounds, longer reach, capable of engaging targets up to 3,000 meters in altitude. On paper, it looked like the stronger system. The commission that ran the state trials recommended both vehicles enter service. The Shilka carried 4 23mm cannons instead, smaller rounds, shorter range. But during trials, when both systems were tested against the same simulated targets at 200 and 500 meters altitude, the Shilka was 1.5 to 2 times more effective than the Yenisei at hitting them. The volume of fire at close range mattered more than the weight of each round. On September 5, 1962, the Council of Ministers signed a decree putting the Shilka into production. 15 days later, all work on the Yenisei stopped. The stronger-looking gun lost because the faster-firing one killed more aircraft where it counted. The 23mm cannon itself was not new. It was adapted from the ZU-23-2, a towed 2-gun mount already in Soviet service. What changed was everything around it: the radar, the fire control computer, the stabilized gun mount, the enclosed armored hull. The Shilka took a known weapon and turned it into something the ZU-23-2 could never have been on its own. If you want to see more on the weapons that almost made it into Soviet service, hit subscribe. That is the kind of story this channel covers. The specs that actually shaped how this thing fought: 4 water-cooled 23mm 2A7 autocannons, each firing 850 to 1,000 rounds per minute. Combined, that is 3,400 to 4,000 rounds per minute. To put that in physical terms, at maximum rate, the Shilka is putting out roughly 1 round every 15 milliseconds. That is faster than a human eye can track. The ammunition was loaded in a 3-to-1 ratio. 3 OFZT incendiary fragmentation rounds for every one BZT armor-piercing tracer. The fragmentation rounds were the primary killers against aircraft. The tracers let the gunner see where the stream was going. The RPK-2 Tobel radar, which NATO called Gundish, could detect targets out to 20 kilometers and lock onto a moving target within 20 to 30 seconds. Once locked, the fire control system fed the cannon's automatic lead calculations. The crew did not need to manually aim at where the aircraft was. They aimed at where it was going to be. Effective anti-aircraft range was 2,500 meters. That is about 1.5 miles, short by missile standards. But within that bubble, anything flying at low altitude was in serious trouble. The Shilka could also fire while moving at up to 40 kilometers per hour, which meant it did not need to stop, set up, and become a static target to do its job. The armor was thin, 9 millimeters in the hull. It stopped small arms fire and shell fragments, nothing more. The vehicle weighed 19 tons. It sat on a tracked chassis borrowed from the PT-76 light tank, giving it solid cross-country mobility and a range of 450 kilometers on a single fuel load. At the time the Shilka entered service, NATO had nothing comparable in the same weight class. The American M42 Duster carried twin 40mm Bofors cannons but lacked radar fire control. It was a generation behind. There is a real debate about whether the Shilka's radar was actually its greatest strength or its greatest vulnerability. It had to emit to track. That made it detectable. Drop your take in the comments. The Shilka was designed to travel with mechanized columns. In Soviet doctrine, a battery of 4 Shilkas was paired with 4 SA-9 surface-to-air missile launchers and attached to each motorized rifle or tank regiment. The missiles handled anything above 300 meters. The Shilkas handled everything below it. Together, they were supposed to make the sky above a Soviet advance impassable. A crew of 4 operated the vehicle: driver, commander, gunner, and radar operator. The turret was cramped. The radar occupied most of the interior space on early models. The diesel engine ran hot. Visibility from inside was limited. This was not a comfortable machine to fight in. In Afghanistan, starting in 1979, the Soviets discovered the Shilka could do something its designers had not intended. Mujahideen fighters ambushed convoys from high ground, from cliff tops and ridgelines. Most Soviet armored vehicles, the T-55s, T-62s, BMPs, could not elevate their guns high enough to shoot back up at them. The Shilka could. Its cannons could traverse almost vertically. So the Soviets stripped the radar out, added night vision sights, and doubled the ammunition capacity to 4,000 rounds. This became the ZSU-23-4 M2, known as the Afghan variant. Only 18 were built at the Ulyanovsk factory, but they became the standard escort for every convoy moving through the mountain passes. Afghan soldiers on both sides called it the sewing machine for the sound it made when it fired. A tight, relentless mechanical rattle. The crews on convoy escort duty lived with the vehicle for weeks at a time. Dust got into everything. The water-cooled barrels required constant maintenance or the cannons would seize. Ammunition ran out fast if a firefight lasted more than a few minutes. Every engagement was a calculation. How many rounds can I spend before I have nothing left? The Shilka's most significant combat appearance was in October 1973 during the Yom Kippur War. Egypt and Syria deployed it as part of an integrated air defense network against the Israeli Air Force. The SA-6 missile forced Israeli pilots to fly low to avoid radar detection. That was the trap. Once they dropped below 300 meters to dodge the SA-6s, they flew straight into Shilka fire. The two systems worked together. The missiles pushed aircraft down. The Shilkas were waiting at the bottom. Israeli pilots in A-4 Skyhawks, Mirage 3s, and F-4 Phantoms found out fast. The Israeli Air Force estimated that roughly a quarter of its combat losses during the war came from ZSU-23-4 fire. Israel lost around 100 aircraft total in the conflict. Some assessments put the combined ZSU-23-4 and SA-6 contribution at 72% of all Israeli losses. The exact split between the two systems is still debated, but the Shilka's role was significant enough that Israel rewrote its low-altitude tactics permanently afterward. NATO did the same. After 1973, Western doctrine required attack helicopter crews to expose their aircraft for no more than 30 seconds at a time when operating near suspected Shilka positions. Pilots flew no higher than 30 feet above cover. The Shilka did not need to be everywhere. It just needed to be plausible. In Afghanistan, the combat record was less about shooting down aircraft and more about destroying positions. The Shilka shredded hilltop fortifications, light vehicles, and personnel with equal efficiency. Its high elevation angle made it the only armored vehicle that could consistently hit targets on the ridgelines above a convoy. The combat record in both conflicts was real but incomplete. Soviet and Arab records from this era are patchy. Exact kill counts are not available. What is clear is the behavioral change. Both NATO and Israeli forces adapted their tactics specifically because of this weapon. That is the most honest measure of what it did. The Shilka was built to fill one gap in Soviet air defense. It did that, and it did it well enough to frighten two of the most technically capable air forces in the world into changing how they flew. But the story did not end in 1973. It did not end in Afghanistan. As of 2022, the Shilka is back on an active battlefield in Ukraine, on both sides. Ukraine has upgraded some of its Shilkas with new digital radar systems specifically designed to track small, low-signature drones like the Russian Shahed. A weapon built in the 1960s to shoot down jets is now being asked to kill $20,000 drones. And it is doing it because the core of what makes it effective, the volume of fire, the speed of acquisition, the ability to move and shoot, has not changed. Retired Soviet Colonel Anatoly Dyakov wrote in his memoirs about the Shilka's fire control system. While today's officers take such autonomous units for granted, it was the pinnacle of engineering design in the 1960s. For the crews who sat in that cramped turret, breathing diesel fumes and dust, listening to that sewing machine rattle overhead, it was not abstract engineering. It was the only thing between them and the sky. 60 years on, it still is. If this one got you, there is more where it came from. Subscribe.